Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shada Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for her people. Shout out to all our co-conspirators out there joining us today, and welcome to our new folks and our new supporters. Welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline. I want to thank everybody who continues to support our We Need Black Teachers campaign. To find out more about our campaign, please visit www.blackteachers.org. Sorry, we need blackteachers.org to find out more and order some merchandise. Along with our We Need Black Teachers campaign, we are creating more opportunities for our young people to get involved. So we are calling on all Black high school students to join us this Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, November 22nd. Please join us if you are a Black high school student for our virtual in Bangi. We'll be posting the link in the chat for folks to register. Again, if you know any Black high school students, so I know a lot of our audiences are educators, so please share with your students, share with your children, share with your grandchildren, but we are calling all Black high school students to please sign up for our virtual Mbangi, where we will be in that space. One of the main topics will be our intellectual genealogy, but we'll also be talking about Black pedagogy and really using the reference of the book From the Lost Education of Horace Tate to guide our conversation. And the lovely Dr. Carr will be leading an interactive lecture for our young people. So please, Black high school students, come on out and support Virtual Mbangi Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So today's show theme, we will be talking about building the Black educator pipeline and telling the truth. Today we'll be exploring and getting a little bit closer to, we all know Thanksgiving this week, and the lies that are just told in education. And frankly, it need to stop. So today we'll be having a very candid conversation about telling the truth and building the Black educator pipeline. As you all know and all will welcome our reoccurring guests, my Baba, our resident Baba, Dr. Carr, who is also co-host of his own YouTube series, In Class with Carr, and also professor at Howard University. Dr. Carr, welcome, brother. Welcome.
Always good to be with you, sis. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, the work is the work. We are in these streets. And shout out to the Center for Black Educator Development and Citizens Ed for giving us this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work, brother.
Yes,
So that's
yes,
what I've been out here doing in the real struggle.
yes.
Yes.
Very happy to be here, and I'm very excited for Monday.
Yes, virtual Mbangi. We are super excited too, with all the plans. I mean, Mbangi is something that, you know, for years in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, um, that's what we've been into. That's what we've been doing. And you building a foundation for that along with Dr. Aisha Imani, Erica Asakoye, and Dr. Sister Kelly Mickens,
Yes,
and really trying to continue that tradition. But
that-
bust it outside of Philadelphia, spread it nationally to young people to be involved in the conversation and to have a voice and elevate
that's
their
right.
voices.
That's right. We are so
So,
honored. I mean, and as we think about the history of this particular iteration of Philadelphia Freedom Schools, knowing that we always started off in the 19th century, at least with the Institute for Colored Youth, but in
yep.
terms of this recent iteration. And our great elder, the great John Churchville from the Freedom Day School and Library back in the 60s, when we got into this current iteration in partnership with the Children's Defense Fund back in the 90s with the Women's Christian Alliance and the Guild, the fount from which so much flows, the Friends Neighborhood Guild.
Yeah.
And then the School District of Philadelphia got involved, and that's when I came in, and Sister Dr. Mama Aisha, and then Sister Erica and Sister Dr. Kelly in 1999. That first year we had our high school students, and we were the first freedom schools in the country affiliated with the Children's Defense Fund to deliberately structure high school students as part of the configuration. In fact, that was a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So that first year in 1999, when David Hornbeck, who was the superintendent of schools at the time in Philadelphia and a member of the Children's Defense Fund board, kind of along with those senior administrators, I think about Cassandra Jones and Kenny Holtzman, I think about ultimately Jermaine Ingram. I'm thinking about these, particularly women, particularly black women. So many black women involved in senior administration at the schools of Philadelphia. By the way, y'all, when you start talking about a black educator pipeline, when I say Cassandra Jones's name, when I say the name of Aisha Imani, when we think about and reflect on the black women who were in senior leadership at the school district of Philadelphia at the time, they followed in the footsteps of women like Connie Clayton, of course, and of course the great Ruth Wright Hare in this regard. They started as classroom teachers. And
Yes.
so those of you who are aspiring to do work to change the literal face and impact of education in this country, for our children in particular, you may start out in a kindergarten classroom. You may start out as a physical education teacher. You may start out teaching music or math. You may start out teaching English or being a classroom aide who then continues to go to school and get their certification and come into the one subject areas. You may end up running the school district.
That's right.
And it was because of those black women in particular. And my direct report at that time was Cassandra Jones. I was her assistant. We were in a unit that was called at the time Education for Employment. And Kenny Holzman was the director of service learning, and his mother. In fact, Kenny's mother was a longtime teacher and counselor at Simon Gratz. So all these are teachers. And so when they called us to put this Freedom School partnership together that first year, because we had high school students involved, in the classrooms, and as we know, Philadelphia Freedom Schools has 2 high school students in every classroom with that college age teacher. We had to have something for them to do, and we designed that curriculum from the ground up the following year, because that first year we basically repurposed the Children's Defense Fund, and this would ties. That's why I'm so excited about Monday night, continuing in this tradition. That first year we took a repurposed version of the Children's Defense Fund curriculum, which was cool, but from the following year on, we structured the curriculum from the ground up, and we anchored it in literacy, and we anchored that literacy in doing deep intellectual work. And that second year, the first book we read in Philadelphia Freedom School was Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, which is, of course, about reparations. And that was 21 years ago. That's long before the reparations conversation we're having now. And I said like this background to Monday night for this reason. At that same time, we began to introduce African terms from African languages. And so we called it deliberately Mbangi, which is a word from the Central Africa, Congo people, Congo and Boche of Umbundu, really the Kikongo formation. And that word literally means a house without rooms. In other words, a place where we're all together and privacy is only in your head. And as the saying Dr. Fukuyama used to teach us, what you think belongs to you. But once you open your mouth and speak, once you open your hand and write or type, what comes out, that belongs to us.
Everybody.
And so in Mbangi means we've read, we've thought about it. Now let's talk about it.
And it's deliberate sharing, deliberate openness.
Very deliberate. And so when I look at how that ball got rolling and how we recruited you, how we recruited that next generation who have now taken this baton and moved with it, you and Stephanie and Anshere and all the people at the center, and then how Baba Sharif, Baba El Mekki, who grew up in that tradition through the African-centered schools, has now, moved to create this platform, and now we're all together. What you'll experience on Monday night is really going to be an unbroken genealogy that stretches from African antiquity through the temporary moments of captivity into the liberation struggle of the 60s and 70s that was re-energized in the 90s. And then for the last 20 years, we have collected it very deliberately. So if you're a young person out there, if you're a teenager, if you're a parent or a community person who wants these young people to be engaged, have them drop in on us. Have them join the Mbangi, the book we are talking about, and we've read all kind of stuff. I might mention, take 2 or 3 minutes and look at some of the books we read over the years and the authors we've invited. We're looking back now at when Black people controlled their educational institutions. It was not ideal. It was Jim Crow, it was U.S. apartheid. But in those schools, Horace and Virginia Tate, the great educators in Virginia and South Carolina, the educators all over that we've talked about in our conversations, what did that look like? And what in gaining the end of apartheid did we lose, and can we recover? Hence the title of Vanessa Siddle Walker's book that our young people are reading and discussing, The Lost Education
of
Dr. Horace Tate. That's right. So we are Man, I can't wait. Monday, we get started again. This one we started year round. We got the summer book, we got the year-round book, we got the summer,
Yes,
we got the
year
year-round
round.
Irangi. It's
It's
cold out.
happening. It's going down, y'all. It's
It's
going
going
down.
down. Hey, some of
Yes.
y'all watching from Africa. I know the time zone is different. Some of y'all watching from England. I know that for a fact. If you got some teenagers, oh wow, Sister Shannon,
Yes.
wouldn't that be interesting to have some teenagers from Ghana and Nigeria and London and maybe
We would love it. We would love it. And again,
yeah.
that's why we made it at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because we wanted at least the West Coast kids to be
Come on,
able to
West
come
Coast.
out of school and get in. So
Where
that's why we made
Compton
it
at?
at
Where
that time.
Seattle at? Where Portland at?
Yeah.
Oh, Bay Area. Where them Oakland Negro? Hey, that used to be our that was our ride or die freedom school, the Oakland Freedom School.
Oakland.
Come on now.
Yes. Oakland was about that life. They was definitely
About
about
that
that life.
Liberation Academy, them Panthers Liberation School. So yeah,
Yes.
it's time, ain't it? Okay,
It is
okay,
time.
I hear you.
So if you're in Africa, if you're a teenager in England, if you know some teenagers,
come on.
listen, if we got some school administrators out there and that time zone is in the middle of a school break, let them log on in, okay?
Come on,
Register our people. Let them log on in.
Come on, hey, come
We
on, Ghana.
appreciate that.
Well, hold this, man. Come on, Ghana. Come on. How y'all doing? Come on in here. Yes. Come on,
Yes.
Europe. Come on, Nigeria. Say la fani. Oh, Danani.
Okay.
No.
The roll call.
No, look, that's them Negroes in Philadelphia whose parents immigrated there from there. So we can roll all that. Hey,
Yes.
this is entered. We are worldwide. Wow.
Yes. We would love to be worldwide. We have the opportunity to be. So again, we would love it. So please.
Glass. Okay, good to see you, brother.
Yeah. Share with our young people and
please.
Let them log in.
Please.
Now the one thing I can always say definitely about Iron Bonding space and any freedom school space we're in, we are committed to historical context and we are committed to telling the truth. That is just one thing we do to build up our young people. And a lot of this, Dr. Carr, we talk week after week, and a lot of my guests come on. And one of the pieces that we've been harping on and really talking about is the importance of historical context and why that's so important. I would love if you could speak to why it's important for in educational spaces for people to start with and infuse historical context into those spaces.
Wow, that's an interesting question and a tough one. You know, this week we saw the publication of the 1619 Project book.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Nicole Hannah Jones and Jake Silverstein, who's the editor of New York Times Magazine, and a book that aspires to create, quote unquote, a new founding of America. And that's a noble aspiration. It's a worthy aspiration. It's not one I'm particularly interested in, but I see the value in it because it shifts people to think differently about the society we live in. And the reason that I would say I'm not particularly interested in it is because I don't really have an investment in continuing the American experiment in its form. That's one reason. And the particularly when people are fighting so hard to maintain the lie. I had a long conversation last night with my law students. It was our last day of class at Howard Law School. And we were talking about the future of the United States in terms of the population shifts and how many of the political acts we see now, the attacks on school boards and with the letter CRT, which if you slap them until they gave you a definition, you'd slap yourself till your hand felt numb because they couldn't tell you what it is. They just know they don't like it. It's CRT, which means it's the N word of the current status. But those type of actions, the attacks on local school boards, we see the hard work of political gerrymandering in places like Texas, where even though all of the population growth in Texas over the last 20 years has been non-white people, the white nationalists have, because they control the legislature, figured out ways to draw the lines to retain power and even remove seats in the federal legislature for the party to see as opposition. We had a long conversation last night about the future of the United States and how this country is being set up by those who have no interest in a society, an open society where all of us work together, but rather have an interest in preserving this false notion of whiteness and protecting, ironically, through this stupidity, the real minority rule in this country, which is the rule of capital and the rich and the elite who don't ever respect any political boundary. Their capital is international. but they rely on white nationalism to stay hidden.
Keep it going. Yes.
We had a long conversation last night about what is really being set up in this country to be minority rule. And so, but it'll be a white minority rule. And
yep.
so we compared, for example, what's going on here with what was set up in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, what was set up in South Africa. And even though the United States of America doesn't look like those two countries in terms of how it was originally set up in a general sense, because Black people were not the majority and neither were Aboriginal people. And we'll talk about that in terms of Thanksgiving in a minute. What we do see, however, is the possibility that through the legal protection of whiteness, there are deliberate attempts now to set up a government system at the state, local, and federal level that will preserve white minority rule. And it won't say white. It will say freedom. It'll say religious freedom. It'll say freedom of association. So, for example, in schools, people will say, I want parental choice. What does that mean? Well, when you read that through a racial lens, I want to have the freedom for my child to learn what I think she or he should learn. Okay. Well, should that include Harriet Tubman? Should that include? No, I don't think so. I think that's racist. You're talking about race. Well, no, you're not. We're trying to educate. No, okay, well, fine. Your child doesn't have to learn it. Once you concede that, you have now cemented white minority rule, because they're not just dictating the terms for their children, they're dictating it for your children. And if we have any chance at all at building a different type of society, everyone has to learn. That's why I support and respect the 1619 Project in terms of what it's trying to do, but I don't have any investment in its ultimate destination because I'm not sure it knows where it's going. Because to read the history, world history in general, and then American history in particular, you have to understand that this country was set up as a white settler state. And if you're going to change it, you're probably going to have to dismantle. You're probably going to have to dismantle some of its institutional supports. You can't reform them. They can't be reformed because they were poured into a flawed foundation.
Well, you can't be reformed because they're set up for something very direct and very specific, and in the interest of very specific people, and that's whiteness.
That's exactly right.
So you would have to dismantle whiteness. There's no reforming whiteness. How do you reform whiteness?
You can't reform it.
You can't reform that.
In fact, it's so funny you say that because of the official state holidays, by state I mean federal holidays on the calendar, there's probably no more white nationalist holiday in a domestic sense than the one that's coming up next week. Because this is the one. It's not the 4th of July. People go, 4th of July. No, the 4th of July was, a family fight between the English and their children that, they declared basically the truce. They staved them off. Well, what about Christmas? Well, Christmas is international white supremacy. So, the absurdity that a white man slid down your chimney and brought gifts to your children when you busted your ass your whole year to give them those gifts, as my friend. The white man came in the middle of the night while your children were asleep and gave them gifts that you bought but will not take credit for. That's an international.
And why these white supremacist folktales always have somebody white breaking in your house?
How about that home invasion? You see that? Oh my God. The straight home. Well, that tells you right there it couldn't be black, because there would be a string of murders occurring as black people dropped into your living room. Right, that's true.
Yes, like this white man just broke him out and he left gifts. Right. Nobody heard him in the night. Okay,
really?
Right. But that's why Santa Claus can't be a black man slide through the white chimney, right? You gonna get
no question. There ain't no black man, no black woman coming down the chimney giving gifts. But yeah, that's a global joint. But Thanksgiving. This is one reason why I particularly, when I, before COVID and if I was in town, if I'm on the Eastern Seaboard, I try to get to New York to watch the Macy's parade, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then after watching the Macy's parade, it's always fun to be in New York City because New York, although it is located in the United States, this as a New Yorker, as John Henry Clark would say, it's really a multi-ethnic nation. So there are so many people in New York who come from places where that ain't no thing, that you can always get a delicious meal anywhere, because they not closing. What is Thanksgiving? It's time now to eat whatever you want. Chinese food, Indian food. You got somebody. Thanksgiving don't mean nothing to us. You know what I mean? So it's a beautiful thing. This is a uniquely American nationalist holiday. So yeah, we should
Yes.
talk a little bit about it today. Yeah.
But yeah, we definitely are, right? We're going to lean into this telling the truth in schools of Thanksgiving. And the reason why I want to lean into Thanksgiving, first of all, I think it's one of the biggest lies told and continue to perpetuate in K-12 American education. Like, this one of the biggest lies told about the story of Thanksgiving. That's one. And two is, even though, right, with the movement to tell the truth about Christopher Columbus, or eradicate some of these lies that happen, people still want to hold on to some of these sick traditions
Oh yeah.
that are associated with Thanksgiving. Again, so you see still people coming, little kids come home. My daughter came home yesterday with a little turkey situation that she was coloring,
Ooh.
and you know what I mean.
It was
All
the
this,
hand joint where you do that. Remember how we had to do that in Kenya? You make
yes.
a little turkey with your hand.
Turkey. She had a little different one. They a little, I don't know what, she had a little art project with the turkey and all this. So of course I'm like, yeah, here we go, right? Like, what are they telling my child about Thanksgiving specifically? But there's so many people out there who still don't know the truth about Thanksgiving. And I feel like it's time. I think it's super important and timely that we begin to tell our children the truth about Thanksgiving. But we have educators and people who don't know the truth about Thanksgiving. So Dr. Carr would love for you to enlighten us and
Oh,
debunk one of the biggest lies about Thanksgiving. And that's that the Indians, well, Native Americans and the Pilgrims sat down and had this beautiful feast
nah,
together. It was all peace.
nah, it was
And
all
I'm not
people.
even gonna give away the true ending, right? But we
Oh
just sat
yeah,
down and had peace after after the slaughter. But please,
right,
can you
right.
enlighten these
Oh
folks?
yeah, no, no question. In fact, and so we have such little time now, but what we're gonna do today is, I think, we can talk about the fact that it starts with the white invaders. That's basically what it's about. And they enter a field of human social relations that they know nothing about and really don't care about. They're trying to survive. So when you get to 1619, 1620, and these pilgrims come across the Atlantic and land in, now, create the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they enter a space where there are already human beings, as you said, the Aboriginals, the First Nations, the Native Americans. In fact, they called them early, and this is why, on Thanksgiving, if I'm in DC, I go down to the Museum of the American Indian, which doesn't close. The Smithsonian's only closed one day a week, or one day a year, and that's Christmas. But I always like to go down there on Thanksgiving to remember these are the people who had suffered the greatest harm, the Aboriginals. And in that region, you're talking about, is a good book by David Silverman called This Land is Their Land.
Mhm.
The Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the troubled history of Thanksgiving. And what he writes about is when the pilgrims landed in, so-called pilgrims, religious fanatics,
Yes.
landed in, I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? When these religious fanatics landed in Plymouth in 1620, the chief of the Wampanoags, his name was Usamaquin. He kind of greeted them, and they greeted them as a way to protect the Wampanoags against their rivals, who were the Narragansetts. So there was a conflict going on. But what happened is the Europeans didn't really care who was on either side. They were looking for allies to survive. So those first couple of winters were brutal. And when you
Mhm.
read the testaments, the primary documents from the era, there were instances where, some of the pilgrims, many of them died. Some were punished because, it got so hungry, somebody died. They just went out there and dug them up and maybe, feasted a little bit on them. I mean, so you have some of that cannibalism going on. This is in addition to the ritual cannibalism of Christianity, but that's a story for another day. Everybody, the Europeans good for calling other people cannibals. And then as you sitting in church drinking this wine and eating this wafer, and they say, take, drink, this is my blood. Nobody makes the connection that that's ritual cannibalism, but they were literally eating people during this period. I think about the great Philadelphian Ishaka Musa Barashango. I remember when I was in grad school reading his 2-volume African People and European Holidays, A Mental Genocide. And Reverend Barashango
Mhm.
would, in fact, he called Christmas the merry mess. And then he went through Thanksgiving, reading the documents, all kind of things. But what you saw is that the tensions between these different groups of Americans I'm not talking about the Pilgrims, because that's what you'll find out. In fact, there's a great exhibit at the Museum now of American Indian called Americans, because the people who came here were not Americans. They
They were
called
European.
they were Europeans. They called the people we now call Native Americans or Indians, because that's what Columbus called them when he bumped into the Caribbean. In North America, they referred to them as Americans. They weren't American, they were Europeans. And so what you see, though, is that these conflict tensions were exacerbated. And for 50 years, these Europeans continued colonial land expansion. They spread disease, and they were exploiting the Wampanoag land for resources. And then they had a war, King Philip's War, which is called the Great Narragansett War. And you see this, that devastated the Wampanoags. Now, why do I bring that out? To this day, the concept of Thanksgiving, that there were these peaceful conversations. First of all, there's no record of any feast happening, and ain't no sitting down and people coming and sitting. No. There's conflict, there's tension, and there's negotiations, because you've entered something you didn't know you were in, and you don't care about it anyway. To this day, that group of Native Americans views this ritual with great sorrow. It's a mourning day.
Yes.
Thanksgiving, because this is when y'all first showed up and our lives changed forever. Changed forever. Yes. Now, your daughter, maybe you when you were a little girl, certainly me when I was a little boy in Tennessee, we learned that history as friendship and partnership, and it's so wonderful.
That the Native Americans invited the Pilgrims in, and they said, "Welcome to our land. Come eat with us. Let me show you how to hunt. And matter of fact, let me show you how to cook this food. You know, we're going to do this. We're going to sit down together because we are friends, and we're going to share this land." That's what you like. People, I mean, they literally make animation movies about it.
Yeah, no question. In fact, it's so funny you say that. We were talking a couple of weeks ago with my law students about the end of the end of the ban on interracial marriage. Some of you all saw Ruth Negga, for example, the actress, who I think she's got an Irish parent, Ethiopian parent. Yeah, she's in this new movie Passing. Is that she played Mildred Loving in the movie based on the real life story Loving versus Virginia. The white man and the black one got married in Virginia, and it was unconstitutional. 1967 is when the Supreme Court ruled that the ban on interracial marriages in Virginia and in the country was unconstitutional. 14th Amendment case. I bring all that up to say this. In Virginia and in many states in the United States of America, it was illegal for a white person to get married to a black person, except, this is crazy, in Virginia, there was a carve-out exception for the descendants of Pocahontas. That's a true story. Wait a minute. First of all, how do you know these people? Second, they have back mapped this quote-unquote love story. Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson. In other words, why do y'all act like these white men came and these Native American women fell in love with them? And of course,
they kidnapped them, raped them, enslaved them, and forced them. Are
you serious? And to the point you just raised, which made me think about it, you know how long that lie's gonna be told? As long as they can get 25 cents together and some animators and make a new Disney movie.
Make a daggone movie out of it.
Okay? Are you serious about this? Or were you serious right now?
Pocahontas loving that white man in Disney. With that, like, you didn't tell the truth about that. You
no,
didn't tell the truth about. You just lying to these kids, like lying, perpetuating these lies.
That's right. So it's not just the classroom. And for every teacher, and now I'm thinking about the teacher wars of the 1970s. Again, building this Black educator pipeline. Those Black teachers, mostly Black women, coming out of the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s, who introduced Kwanzaa in the classrooms. You know what I'm saying? They were. So if you're thinking about this, if you're a K-12 teacher, particularly if you're younger grades, and you got to be careful what you bring into children's minds around Thanksgiving. Just because you put up a poster with some video, because they got enough of that propaganda, they got to fight at home.
Yes.
So, and then of course, and this isn't just Thanksgiving. This is going to be the cosplay that occurs around Halloween. I distinctly remember the what's that colored paper that we used to cut out and make stuff out of? Not
construction, mache.
Yeah, exactly. See, these are things that you got to make pilgrim. Yeah, you can make an Indian head, man, with a cardboard feather.
Yes, out of construction paper.
Out of construction paper. The pilgrim hats. Or who's gonna be a pilgrim? Who's gonna be
Indian? Who's gonna be Indian?
You know what I'm saying? Wait a minute. What are you doing? Black children. Insane. Yes. Insane. Cosplay, as James Baldwin wrote in one of his pieces that Raoul Peck adopted in the documentary "Am Not Your Negro." He said we would go to the movies and root for the Cowboys against the Indians, and we didn't realize the Indians were us.
They us. They are us. And when you think, so the reason, especially the reason why I wanted to talk about this today, right, is because when you think about it and you become enlightened or you are informed and you begin to know the truth, you really sit back and think about how wild some of the stuff is that we push in education. Like, it's super wild, right? Like, it's wild that we would sit up here and have kids put on pilgrim hats and Indian hats and say, you're the pilgrims, you're the Indians. If you really know what happened in their relationship, like, who's the murderer and who's the slaughter, like that's what you're doing in that sense, because we're not teaching the truth. We are perpetuating lies. And for me, Hollywood is Hollywood, right? Like that, we already know, like, they sick, they capitalistic, they after money, like, you know, they make the movie for the dollar. They're not out here putting out truths. That's not what Hollywood's goal is. But as a teacher, I think you have a responsibility to teach children the truth. It's your responsibility not to lie to them. It's your responsibility not to perpetuate lies, especially to young Black children. But one of my things is, this shouldn't be a thing for all children. No children, white children, shouldn't even be taught these type of lies, because again, they grow up with a certain type of mindset about America, which is why you have people fighting and screaming in the streets about, this is America. Like, if you don't love this country, you can get out. Or, this is America. Our people built this land. Or, this is America. The Native Americans didn't have a problem when we came. I mean, what about Thanksgiving? You really quote Thanksgiving, sir? You don't know what happened? Oh, okay, because you don't. Because somebody taught you through American doctrinization that Thanksgiving was a thing where we sat down and we had a wonderful time.
That's right.
My other issue with this is the censorship, right? We're now in the age of censorship, right? And for all the things that Donald Trump is, one of the things he did do was bring a heightened sense to censorship, right? People like, you're not going to be out here spreading this information. We're going to shut you down. We're going to take you off these networks. Now everything has to get read and censored and blah, blah, blah. And of course, we know with COVID-19, people also aren't allowing the spread of misinformation about COVID or about the vaccine. You know, you have all of that stuff. But in the height of censorship and all this other stuff, I'm so baffled by how we're still allowing these type of lies to be perpetuated. I mean, everywhere, this type of propaganda to continue to happen, to go on, because it's a flat out lie.
That's right.
So I'm really curious to understand, how are companies and organizations allowed to still publish textbooks and curriculum with these kind of lies told and published in print?
It's profit. Well, I mean, the short answer is that it has nothing to do with education. During segregation, when Carter G. Woodson, for example, started the Associated Publishers, one of the things that the Associated Publishers, Black owned, a part of the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, one of the things they were able to do was recruit authors, children's authors included, to create and distribute to the segregated schools materials. It's always been a war. But once textbooks become big business in any system, it's really about how much money can you make. This was the fight. This is actually, interestingly enough, we're talking about Thanksgiving in like the quick 60-second story. When we developed the curriculum in Philadelphia, the Africana Studies model we use as the framework, the curriculum framework, which we still use in Africana Studies for the African American History course that everybody has taken Philly high schools to graduate. The first thing we decided, Dana King, myself, her brother John, Mario Beatty, and Valethia Watkins, our whole team, Daoud Watts, first thing we decided was we weren't going to fight the textbook battle. Because now that this is mandatory in the schools, there's going to be a war over which textbook to buy, because it's big money. And we don't like none of the African-American history textbooks because they start with slavery. Yeah, they say Africa, but it's just a little bit of it. And then they get to the whip. This is the fundamental flaw with the 1619 Project as well. You start just with slavery. So rather than fight that fight, we said if we can get a different curriculum, we can ask different questions. I'll come back to that in a second. But the reason I raised that, and what you observe about, the books and the materials, is it's money. This is millions of dollars, billions over years. And so who gets the textbook contract? No different than who gets the light bulb contract or who gets the gasoline contract to fuel the school buses. This is dollars and cents being traded hands. And so the reason that we perpetuate this stuff has less to do with truth and more to do with two things. One is the material thing we just talked about, profit, money. The other thing is the imaginary community. And that's where the second part is really, Thanksgiving, really a three-part story. There's what happened, which is very complex. And as the brother Silverberg says in his book, This Land's Your Land, he says, You should understand the foolishness in this nonsense that somehow native people willingly handed off their country to the invaders. So there's but then there's the second iteration of the story, the second part of the story, which is why have it as a holiday in the first place. And that begins with as early as the Revolution, where they start giving thanks for what? Conquest. So the first rituals of Thanksgiving, George Washington proposed to thank winning the Revolutionary War. Thanks for winning the war. Thanks for passing the Constitution. And then that second part of the story morphs over the years until the appearance, and this is a Philadelphia story in part, Sarah Joseph Hale. Y'all know that name, Hale. Sarah Hale, and by the way, I saw Brother Gerald ask the question, how can we help students understand? Because they often say history is boring. All history is a story. See if this story is boring. Sarah Hale, and I'll keep this quick. Sarah Hale was a white woman who in 1827 took over as an editor of a very influential national publication called Godey's Ladies Book. And for 40 years, she was the editor of that. She, in fact, y'all, everybody knows her. You don't know, may have not heard that name, but she wrote a poem in 1830 called Mary's Lamb. That's Mary's had a little lamb. Right? You know what I'm saying? And she was the editor of this journal. Actually, from 1837, she was the editor. She helped found Vassar College, but she also worked to preserve Bunker Hill in Boston as a monument, and she also helped raise money with other people to restore George Washington and Martha Washington's plantation, Mount Vernon. In other words, she knew that whatever happened in the past, it's how you tell stories about it that build national identity. And so she was at the center of a movement to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. And she banged on the federal government for 30 years until finally Abraham Lincoln, responding to a letter she wrote in September 1863, and at the behest of his Secretary of State, William Seward, declared Thanksgiving a national holiday. That's part two of the part three. But why is that important? What is happening to Black people and Native Americans during this period? You got war on the Native Americans from coast to coast. They're pushing them west. You got Africans enslaved having to fight our way out of enslavement during a civil war, while this white woman is saying one of the ways we can get the North and the South back together is to have a common celebration. Guess what they celebrated in the Confederacy and in the Union? Thanksgiving. Because then it got nothing to do with the Native Americans, nothing to do with the Blacks. And so what you see is in the second part of this three-part story of Thanksgiving, they are building myths. And myth making is what nations rely on. That's why you're going to have it in school. That's why you're going to have it. You got to bring these myths in to create this notion of community, except in creating it, you are doing violence to everybody the white nationalists roll on. Yes. So now the Native Americans like, where am I? The African people are like, where? Well, I guess I got to pick Indian or cowboy. Well, what about, okay, I'll pick Indian. I'm against y'all. No. In the story, you were glad to give your land over. It was friendship. Nobody died. Nobody was killed. Millions weren't put in the correctional homes and told to cut their hair and lose their language. You didn't slaughter Native American children and bury them in secret, and you just finding the bodies in 2020. No, you said, come have some cranberry sauce, have some turkey, sit down, let us pray. Who you praying to? Y'all don't even pray to the same God. These fanatics, these jihadists came over from here to wipe you out because they called you savages. Anyway, so that's the second.
Can you imagine if you're Native American, right? And you like in the school and you hearing this story at Thanksgiving? It's like literally they equate it to like being a human person and somebody's telling a dead bold-faced lie on you, and you sitting there watching people believe this lie.
Bold-faced lie. And can you imagine, to the point you raised a minute ago, Shana? Can you imagine if you are a human being? No human being should be comfortable with that. But now, as teachers and adults and media makers, and you've invaded the minds of children with propaganda that when they wake up to it, now they got cognitive dissonance. Because here's the other strain that's going on. Anytime you have an opportunity to be with your family, you take that opportunity. But it's been narrated like, oh, Black people believe in Thanksgiving. No, I believe, no. You believe in being with your family. You don't believe in that lie. In fact, you try to tune it out, but what you're not don't realize is, even though you're trying to tune it out, you're still learning it, and you're learning how to be quiet in the face of oppression. So rather than blow up the classroom, you just eat it and come home like, yeah, they came and talked. As Asa Hill used to say, it's the equivalent of sending children off to battle. You know this is some, you sitting there like, but you're learning how to respect whiteness, and that is just as dangerous.
Yep.
For
Well,
white
Michelle Mulberry said it in she just wrote it in the chat. Like, we are accepting that whatever white people tell us is always the truth.
it's always the
And,
truth.
and
And
that's
so
that myth making, because they said it is true.
that's right. And if you take that as right, then you simply have to be less than human. Why? Because if you're Native American, you think and say, well, I guess we took an L because we were weak. If you were black, you say, oh, I guess we sold ourselves into slavery. All the erasures come when once you accept that white lie at the center, you have now begun to rank yourself in humanity. But that's part two. Let me go to part three right quick. Part three ain't got nothing to do with no Indians and pilgrims. Ain't got nothing to do with no set of colonialism. It's all capitalism. In the 1920s, anybody, some of y'all know the answer to this question. The first Thanksgiving parade wasn't in New York. It was Gimbel's department store, the Gimbel Brothers department store, and it wasn't in New York. The Gimbel's brothers had their first place. In fact, what was the first department store in America?
You know,
Oh,
I don't know. I'm probably gonna say what,
it's
Woolworth?
close.
What?
W. Wanamakers. Right down there across from City Hall, John Wanamaker. And remember, that's also, there's a historical mark out there because the lady that started Mother's Day. This is a Philadelphia story. The first Thanksgiving parade was in Philly. It was the Gimbel's Brothers department store that had it. And then what happened? This thing is 1920. R.H. Macy in New York, billing himself in his new store on Herald Square as the world's largest department store. Who's working for Macy's? A bunch of people, many of whom are first generation immigrants. Now, Thanksgiving is now a national holiday. What do these people who come from countries that don't celebrate Thanksgiving do on a day where the store is closed?
They working.
No, they got the day off. There's no parade yet. They start coming to Macy's on their day off, since it's Thanksgiving, which means a day off, showing off foods from their native countries, native dress, because the store is closed. They start having a celebration. Remember, these people, this is New York City. You know, as New York, they don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but they got the day off. So now they have a celebration. Macy is watching. Macy's paying attention. By 1924, you know what? Let's open this up. We'll create a parade, invite people down, and many of the people in the 1924, the first Macy's parade, were workers of Macy's who were immigrants from other countries, and they started dressing up. They started putting all this stuff together. They had a Macy's parade, and they didn't call it the Thanksgiving parade. They called it the Christmas parade. Watch this. Sister Shana, we all know the answer to this question. Who is the last person in line, the last act, the last float, the last person in the parade at every Thanksgiving parade? Who is the last person to come in? Who's the last person to march? You got the balloons, you got the marching bands, who's the last person to ride in, waving at everybody?
If you know, comment in the chat, like and share. I don't watch parade, Dr. Carr, so I
you
never
ever seen one though?
The only parade that I've participated in and been a part of is the African American Day Parade.
Oh, you're a maroon. Everybody, that's a beautiful thing. That's because everybody knows who's seen the Thanksgiving parade. The last act is Santa Claus.
Yeah, I mean, they in the chat. Santa is the last.
Klaus is the last one. Now, as I tell my students at Harold, I love this. I say, you know what? Klaus is waving, and nobody's saying bye, except it ain't spelled B-Y-E. It's spelled B-U-Y.
B-U-Y.
No question, because that's why they call the day after Thanksgiving Black Friday. R.H. Macy understood. That's why they call it the Christmas parade. Thanksgiving is the official start of the Christmas season. Why? Ain't got nothing to do with Christmas, nothing to do with Thanksgiving. Got to do with come spend your money at 34th and Herald Square, Macy's. And at the end of that first Macy's parade, they built a golden throne on the top of the marquee at Macy's, where Klaus got out of his ride onto the throne and started presiding over, because it's time for y'all to open these doors and empty your wallets. So this is the third part of the Thanksgiving story. In other words, this is when people beating each other up in Walmart at 12:01 a.m. in Valdosta.
Well, that's why it's Black Friday.
No question. This is the origin. It's straight capitalism. Thanksgiving ain't got nothing to do with national identity and everything to do with pie. 3 years later, they introduced Felix the Cat. That's the first helium balloon to come
Yes.
through. Now, and I'll wind up with this. Two quick examples. Every year it builds. Every year it builds. Every year it builds. By 1939, you're in the middle of the ending of the Depression. Franklin Roosevelt's president. Roosevelt wants to move Thanksgiving back to the third week in November. Why? He wants to expand the time people gonna spend their money. You know what I'm saying? People cry bloody murder for a couple of years. It's 2 Thanksgivings going on in America. Finally, he bends the pressure, returns it to the 4th week, and that's a couple of years later, they passed the resolution, and that's why it's going to be the 4th week forever. Since the white girl told Abraham Lincoln to do it, and Lincoln, after the Gettysburg Massacre and the Gettysburg Address, is looking for a nationally unifying holiday. Remember, they celebrated Thanksgiving in the Confederacy too. Jefferson Davis gave 2 annual Thanksgiving proclamations. He's the one keeping us enslaved. I started to say this. Now, here, let's fast forward to where we are now. Why do I go to the Macy's parade? Because it is a brilliant example, as are all the Thanksgiving parades, of capitalism. If you're standing at 34th and Herald Square, if you stand in front of Macy's, and I've done this many times, I watch NBC broadcast. I watch when the cameras go up. I watch when the cameras go down. Because if you're not there, if you're at home watching, you think them choices is accidental when they put that camera and put it down. The balloons on this coming Thanksgiving, and you know, you got Thanksgiving parades everywhere. I'm just using an example. There are 15 character floats that are going to be in the Macy's parade. 56 novelty balloons. They're going to be 80 marching bands. I'm sorry, 10 marching bands, and they're going to be, I forget all the numbers, but the point is this: when they got the big balloons, you know why I like to go? You see, here's the parade. In the first row, children. Behind them, their parents. Then 4, 5, 6 deep. You know who knows every balloon in the damn parade?
Who?
The children. Because they aren't accidental balloons. They're tied to TV shows and products. There goes Clifford the Big Red Dog. There goes the comfy couch. There goes every one of them balloons is tied to something they want their mama to buy across the street in Macy's or online. So what you're really watching is a long ass commercial, and the balloon, and then the you know, oh, look, here comes so and so. Here comes so and so. Here comes the Up With People. Here comes the singers. Oh, here comes Mary J. Blige. Oh, look, who's so and so singing? Then here come the band that sold cookies for a year to get to the parade. They come down, the cameras go down.
Because that's how you get in the parade.
No question. They don't, but the cameras go down. They ain't being broadcast. Oh, here come the Star Trek crew. The cameras go back up. We're back from break, because while that marching band was walking past, they sold you something on the commercial. And so, but if you stand in there, you can look on your phone. Look, oh, they took that. They are literally dictating. And then finally, my man's comes in late. Here comes Santa. Bye. Bye, B-U-Y, 12:01 a.m. Come get all the stuff you saw in the parade. It is a remarkable testament. The first, so in summary, the first movement of Thanksgiving is settler colonialism and killing the Native Americans. And then you rewrite it to make it look like they welcomed you to take their stuff. The second movement is creating national identity out of a myth, out of that myth. And that happens during the Civil War, because it's part of an attempt to keep the North and South together, and damn them Native Americans and blacks, we got to be thankful. What are you thankful for? Killing and repossessing and all this kind of thing. The third act, and now we want all your money, and we want it right now. so
when I say,
you know what I'm saying? So,
the truth, the real truth about Thanksgiving,
no question.
Dr. Carr. Dr. Carr.
But that ain't got nothing to do, which is why I'm so grateful for the center. I'm so grateful for you, and I'm grateful for Freedom Schools still going strong. Send your teenagers in, please. We've been doing this now for years, and I'm grateful for that Africana Studies framework we developed out of conversations with these Philadelphia Freedom School teenagers, y'all, that became the template for the framework we now use. We used in Philadelphia for the mandatory African history course, and now we use it in this Africana Studies sense, because in those categories, that first question, the social structure question of the 6, who are Africans to other people, and we saw this in the chat, people been talking about it. The idea is the story we just talking about, that's who we are to other people. You never ask the Native Americans who they are to each other. If you're ever in DC, go down to the Museum of the American Indian on Thanksgiving. You'll get a glimpse of who people are to each other. And it's a very complicated question. Now, who we are to ourselves, that's why we never mistake this day off next week with any of these stories. I'm just glad to go see my grandma. I'm just glad to see my mama. I'm just glad to sit with my pops. I'm just glad to go argue about football teams with my, although, I don't do that no more because since Kaepernick, I ain't seen a play and won't see a play. But there are going to be people who gather, fly, Eagles,
Mhm.
fly on the road to victory, which I always thought was interesting because I'm like, how do you fly on a road? But anyway, you could have said fly, Eagles, fly on a way
They
to
been on the
victory.
path,
But anyway, I'm not
I
going
don't-
I'm saying, oh, wait a minute. How y'all fly on a road? Okay, you know what? This is definitely some old South Philly shit, man. You should have said fly, Eagles, fly on the way to victory. On the way, right? But you don't fly on the road. I mean, unless you drive the car. But anyway, point is this: they're gonna argue football. They're gonna decide who's corn muffins or who's cornbread or who's macaroni and cheese the best. Have at it. They're gonna play spades and get in a fight. Somebody gonna have too much to drink. It's great, but guess what? That ain't got nothing to do with them Native Americans. Now, if you want to do it right, I would say in that moment, this is where you teach the children. You bring them together and you call your ancestors. We give thanks for our ancestors. You can convert the holiday, but
So
you can
that was my other
yeah,
question. So one,
exactly.
Vito, I want to you asked for a program in DC. So please, if you go to some earlier comments this Monday night at 7 p.m., please share the link with any high schoolers. You know they're welcome to come to our virtual Mbangi. So that's open to
Please.
any high schooler. It's not a in-person program; it is virtual.
You
So
about to bust the internet.
yeah. So so I
You say
hope
bust the
so.
internet
So
out.
we love to have your high schoolers and your scholars
Yes.
in our virtual Mbangi programming. But that's the other question I had, Doc, because I love that you're saying this, right? Because I would say Thanksgiving is one of the staples of Black culture because this is when really, us as a Black people get to show off this cooking child and we love to eat. That's a part of like who we are. It brings family together.
That's right.
So do you think it's a holiday that, Black people should still celebrate?
It's a day off. And in fact, I look at you know what I'm saying? And if you got a day off and you got a couple of days before or after, you go home. And so I think that I look at Thanksgiving the same way I look at the rest of the European rituals. If it's a day off, in fact, that's the way many Black people look at it in the governance structure,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that our challenge becomes how much do we want to invest in fighting, which is why, again, building this Black educator pipeline is essential because when you are a child, you are defenseless. In other words, when you go into a classroom, you are literally at the mercy of those adults. And
Yep.
I mean that to sound harsh because in many ways it is. If you are a young person, if you're a 5 or 6 or 7-year old, a 13-year old, a 18-year old, if you're an 11-year old trying to work through, what you're experiencing outside the classroom, what you're learning at home, what you're being constantly inundated with through social media, and you come into that classroom to learn, you are literally at the disposal of that adult.
Yep.
And so the question becomes, how much do you want to fight? If the thing when you're learning a narrative that troubles your spirit, but you don't yet have the content to push back, do you just sit there? And if you keep asking questions, if you got the wrong kind of teacher, you'll be looked at as a problem because they in there already hanging on by their fingernails, and maybe they didn't get the best content mastery, maybe they didn't get the rest classroom management, so they looking at you like this is disruptive and you could get written up. So that's why you got to have
Yep.
teachers in there who love the children. We say that all the time. Sharif says it all the time, you say it all the time. I think about Sister Njamele. I mean, I've said, when you love the children, you got all the room in the world and you help them ask better questions, you help them come together. But the only other thing I would say is in terms of that ritual of Thanksgiving, Freddie Douglass wrote about this. He said, on the plantation, we took off the week between Christmas and New Year's. We fish for ourselves. We tend to our little gardens. We would celebrate, working for ourselves. And they never liked that on the plantation, the people who had us captive. Why? They wanted us to get drunk and run foot races and do all kinds. They didn't want us to do anything during that period that would help us. They wanted us to be, basically doing nothing and then going back to work. But the point Douglas is making is this: we saw that as our time. So Thanksgiving on that holiday, see that as your time. You ain't got, and when I think about Black folk, we praying to whatever we pray to, we laughing at whatever we laugh at. We're celebrating being together.
Yes.
Now, the only question I would raise then is, how much are we invested in building a different kind of society that destroys those myths? And if we're truly invested in them, are we willing to do the work to not only free ourselves, but free other people? And I think that's the work that Nicole and them are doing with the 1619 Project. They're trying to free other people. And I respect that. I admire that. I don't choose to spend my energy in that because I don't know where that necessarily goes when you're in a society where other people will nod and say they're for that too, and then turn around and not support legislation to make sure there are no unhoused people in this country. Then stand against legislation to make sure everybody has child care and things like that. And so you can nod your head all you want. You can invite and give people honorariums to tell you how bad whiteness is all you want. And then you turn around and don't change the policy. I would much rather us build our own institutions. And what history tells us is when you build your own institutions, you send your teenagers into Freedom School on Monday. When you decide you're going to support the educators and build this Black educator pipeline, when you build networks, you know what happens? Power then shifts. And as Douglas said, power conceives nothing but out of demand. It never has, it never will. So
I agree. And then the other thing before we because we be running against time because I
that's
can't
all
even
right.
believe
That's
the
all right.
time done blew by,
Oh,
child.
no question.
But I think that sometimes, and I was going through this too during Hispanic Heritage Month, like there's a disconnect sometimes between people and history and things, but we can't forget that on this holiday, like you said, it's a day of mourning for our Native American brothers and sisters. So how can we honor their legacies and like promote their contributions? How can Black people do that?
Well,
Again, in unison and in camaraderie with Native American.
I'll say this very quickly. Number one, it's not related to blood. So you ain't got to have no blood tie to the Aboriginal people of this hemisphere to identify with them. It's not only based on common oppression. In other words, we all suffered, but it's not the only basis for building solidarity. It's based on a recognition that every group in the human family has something to contribute, and that these people, these very different people of the hemisphere, as many as 100 million, if we take Charles Mann's number from his book 1491 and then 1493, his book, that these very different people all had thinking traditions, cultural traditions that continue to exist. Native Americans are not dead, as Roxana Ortiz writes. She's got a couple of books on this. I think we honor that by pausing and never accepting Thanksgiving, for example, on this day, never celebrating Thanksgiving without first, in other words, never celebrating being able to spend time with people you love and community. When you come together, the first thing you should recognize is this is a day of mourning for many of the members of the human race. And that settler colonialism that happened in the Western Hemisphere happened all over the world. So that the Africans in the continent of Africa have a lot in common with the Aboriginals of the Western Hemisphere because it happened to them. And we have to celebrate, let them know they're there. And if you're around DC one time, go to the Museum of the American Indian because they do it right. I mean, they have all the jokes. I went down there one Veterans Day and they had the Native American veterans. And I asked the brother, I said, now, why y'all join the Army? He said, because if they attack America, that's my land first. So I just got the patch on my arm with the flag, so they'll give me a gun so I can go fight to keep them off my land too. It's my land first. And then I remember one time they did a dance, and the guy was saying, I'm doing this dance. And then he said on the microphone, yeah, y'all hear that? That's the last thing Custer heard. And then everybody started laughing. I'm like, see, this is why I come down here and mess with y'all, because the resistance in Native America is real. So, I mean, this is a day of mourning. Never forget that. And then you celebrate community, you understand that we survived and thrived in spite of America, not because of America.
That's right. Agreed. I appreciate this, Doc, because just feel like, again, we have opportunity to provide resources for people with this platform. And again, a lot of what you spoke of today, people don't make those connections, and people don't know. They just don't know. And everything that you spoke about today, y'all, even if y'all want to take this episode and build and do snippets of it for y'all classes to teach the truth about Thanksgiving. And it involved history, literacy, and math. The mathematics behind capitalism is crazy.
You know what? That would be an interesting math lesson if you counted up the number of elements in the Macy's parade, divided them into categories, and then sent the high school students out to determine how much money is made by the companies that sell the toys connected to each one of them balloons, for example. How much of it? And then you talk about
math lesson, talk about commerce. All of that. Yes.
Yes,
Shout out to all this math.
all this
Shout out to
math.
Brother
A
Akil.
kill, no question. That's all this math, no question.
Yes. No,
See,
for real.
I
For
love it. I
real,
love it.
all in one. But the way you broke this down today, Doc, I mean, I don't, I didn't expect nothing less. But I
Nah,
wanted
we
to make
great
sure
together.
again, these lies that we tell or we allow people to perpetuate, they
That's
have
right.
to be stopped. They have to
They
be
gotta be
stopped.
stopped.
And I know
Stop with
sometimes
these
it's
Thanksgiving lies.
uncomfortable. I know
Shannon,
sometimes uncomfortable.
no,
My
man,
kids
you're
were
right.
talking to me the other day about Thanksgiving, and it's like, hey, so yeah, I know what they're gonna tell y'all in school, but let me tell you what what the real story is. Say no happy time for no turkeys and everything else. We're gonna eat next week though. We're
We're
gonna
gonna eat.
celebrate it as a family,
No
but you need
question.
to know what went on that day.
That's right.
And I have
And,
to
and,
give a
and a
shout
lot of
out
people
to
serve too. Wait, who? What is
I
that?
was gonna say I gotta give a shout out to Brother Jerome. When I was little, I took dance class. And he was the leader of the Rock Bay School of Dance. And
Yes,
Brother
yes.
Jerome told us the truth about Thanksgiving when I was in middle school. Told us
Oh,
the truth about Thanksgiving. I don't know if this story is true, but he told us a story about where football came from. That's when the Pilgrims cut off the Indians' head and kicked it around. That's where the sport came from. But this is Brother Jerome. Like this, is how he introduced us to like. I don't know what the people going to tell y'all, but I'm gonna tell y'all the real. So
Brother
shout
Jerome
out
took
to
that
Brother
as
Jerome Hunter, leader of yes, leader and principal owner of the School of the Rock Bay School of
Ashe,
Dance, who was
Ashe. That's what I'm
definitely
talking
I say was formative in my life. But
about. Mm-hmm.
Doc, we thank you, day, and we love you. And this was
We
dope.
love you too. I love you too. I know I'm gonna see you Monday,
We
7
definitely see
p.m.
you
Eastern
Monday.
Standard for the
Yes.
International Mbangi with all the
Yes.
teenagers in the world, the Black nation coming together. I can't wait.
Yes. And
Yo,
guys, you out there watching, I put the link in the chat. So if you know any high schoolers, if you are a high schooler watching, please make sure you click that link and register yourself for virtual Mbangi. Again,
that's right.
calling all Black high school students.
No
We're
question.
even welcoming our younger college age students. So if you are a freshman or sophomore in college, you are also welcome in this space. This is
Oh,
a youth led space. We are all intergenerational, y'all. Definitely are, but we want this to be a space for our young people to
yes,
really come and get this knowledge and have their voices heard. And again, it's a house without walls to collectively share with one another. So
collective.
please, Black high school students, calling all of you guys to please fellowship with us Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Virtual Mbangi.
No question. Oh,
Doc, you have any final words before we get up out of here?
oh no, but you just made, you know what, Shannon, you just triggered a memory. It's during this period that we used to, before COVID, and then always, and Sister Dr. Kelly would always spearhead this. We would have the Freedom Schools reunion.
Yep.
It would be the Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, we would have everybody come, and I missed that. So we gotta do that.
we
gotta
do. We got to figure out how to do it safely. We got to figure out how to do it. I'm pretty sure Dr. Sister Kelly will be showing up at Virtual Mbangi. She can't,
Oh, no
she will
question.
probably definitely be there.
No
But we
question. But
definitely need to figure out
we
how
need
to.
to have one where we just bring all the people. I mean, because some of these people got children. We got
Yes.
bookstore owners, the sister that runs Harriet's joint. She has
Yes.
JSL. And we got, this is the beauty, y'all. And look, share this in your relevant networks. There's a lot of teachers who watch, and get these young people together. It certainly changes our lives.
Yes,
So,
and
yeah.
it helps us build our
Oh, there
next
goes
generation of
Stephanie.
educators. Hey, Steph. Yes, Stephanie will also be one of the primary facilitators on Monday.
Let's
Doing this
go.
with us, my girl, Stephanie Joy.
Yes, be told.
Yes.
Oh, no. Thank you.
But
Love you.
thank you, everybody, for today. We are
Yes.
at time, so we are going to close out. So
Yes.
next week we will not have an episode. I hope that you take today's episode with you in your hearts next week when you are down with your family.
Play this
If
with
you
your family.
playing spades, right? Eat some macaroni and cheese, some greens that you were talking about the truth,
Come on.
paying homage and respect to our ancestors on Thanksgiving. So take this episode with you in your heart.
Put the big joker
we will
on
see
white
you guys.
What? Thanksgiving? Oh, bam!
Yes.
This is the ace of spades. The black.